Hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Donna and I'm part of the membership team here at IRSM. Your speaker and branch chair today is Peter Hurley. But before I hand over to Peter, I'm just going to run through a few things first. To begin with, you should see to the right of your screen a toolbar with various options. You will be on mute for the duration of the webinar. Feel free to ask any questions, make any comments using the question area, and we will take 5 to 10 minutes to respond to these at the end of today's presentation. If you need any support using GoToWebinar, the I symbol will take you to the support site. Finally, this webinar is being recorded and a copy of the recording will be placed on the IRSM YouTube channel after the event. Okay, so that's enough from me. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Donna, and welcome everybody. I should just share my screen. Okay, can you all see that?
Yep, we can see it.
Excellent, very good. Okay, so thank you again, Donna, for the introduction, and welcome to the 102nd branch meeting of the UAE branch of IRSM. I should be with you throughout the duration today. We'll have the usual introduction and branch updates, and then we've got a presentation regarding safety in the heat, looking at aspects of the hazards and processes for management and control. We'll have a short Q&A and any other business at the end. Okay, so some branch news for you. You've probably seen on the WhatsApp group and maybe on LinkedIn that IRSM has signed an MOU with Abu Dhabi University, and this will help to advance research and raise awareness of risk and safety within the UAE. It's another great milestone for the branch and for IRSM generally as it continues to expand and develop its network here in the UAE and globally. Quick plug for the LinkedIn page. Okay, this time last week it was nearly 900 followers. I haven't checked it since, but I encourage everybody to ask their network on LinkedIn to give the page a follow. Got a message from Jason. I don't know if he's here today, but there's a meeting for IPAF members on the 10th, which is tomorrow, in the Radisson Red in Dubai. He did post on the group, so on the WhatsApp chat. So if anybody's interested and they're available, then you can get yourselves along tomorrow. They've also added an IPAF membership category, which is HSE professional. So that's something that the guys here might be interested in looking out for. And I got a message from one of our members here at the branch, Prosper Ogalamina. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. He's pleased to announce to the group that he passed his CSP exam, and he tells me that he had some specific help from some of the branch members who supported him in preparing for the examination. He wanted to express his deep gratitude and sincere thanks for all of the support that he's received. So as chair, I'm really pleased, obviously, whenever anybody obtains any sort of further professional qualification, but also it's great to know that the network is there helping members and supporting each other in our professional development as well. So well done everybody there. Okay, some training coming up to tell you about. You can find all of this information on the IRSM website. Just go to iirsm.org, or you can email the address at the bottom, training@irsm.org. But there's a number of good courses coming up. They're all online, and all those times given on the right hand side are GMT UK time. So add 4 until I think the end of March, and then add 3. So we've got CDM and building safety, ISO standards and risk management, both in early March. Developing an effective wellbeing strategy. Wellbeing is becoming an increasing focal point of health management and occupational health. one perhaps for me, running an effective risk workshop coming up towards the end of March, and then another wellbeing training course on the 29th of March. 30th of March, introduction, that should be ISO, sorry, not the parenthesis there, introduction to ISO 45003. And then there's a couple scheduled for April and May, which I've included down at the bottom. So if anybody's interested in attending any of those, you can check out the information on the website, and you can sign up and register through the website or through the email at the bottom. Events coming up. The Saudi Arabia branch is meeting on the 16th of February, followed by Qatar on the 22nd. So links will be available on the website, and we'll try to share them on the group as well. In the UK, Scotland branch met last week, if anybody attended, and West Midlands are meeting tomorrow, with London meeting next week. As mentioned at the start by Donna, all of the webinars for previous branch meetings will be available on the IRSM website and on the IRSM YouTube channel. So if you miss anything, if you want to go and dip into any of the other branches, if you want to revisit any of the content that you've seen to refresh your memory or to check information, then the resource is available there on the internet as well. Okay, some professional development workshops coming up. Again, these are all available in the events section of the IRSM website. Utilising skills and investing in people will be taking place next week. That is next week, isn't it? Yeah, next Thursday, I think. Planet Interrupted, lessons learned from COVID-19, the week after on the 22nd. So I think you've got some good current and topical information coming through there. And then Leading with Courage at the start of March. From a branch perspective, our schedule as we move forward through 2022, we'll be having a presentation, if you like. We'll be having our branch meeting next March. We'll be focusing on the UAE Branch Committee. Okay. Obviously, over the last couple of years, it's been very different to the more traditional functioning of the IRSM branch, in the sense that we've not been meeting, so we've not been networking, we've not been meeting in physical locations like we used to in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So we've not been able to network, we've not been able to have the interaction that I think we really do crave as a membership organisation. It's made my job a little bit more challenging, and I know it's made the job of the committee a bit more challenging, and it's probably made your job or your roles as members more challenging as well. And I know it's been difficult for you as members to reap all of the benefits that you would have traditionally got from the branch in the pre-COVID era. Now, I'm not sure when we're going to go back to the new normal, which will allow us to meet physically. I've speculated about it before, so I'm not going to risk doing that again. What the purpose of next month's branch meeting will be, though, will be to introduce to you the branch committee members, not that they really need any introduction, but also to give them the opportunity to explain to you just what their roles and functions are. And the reason for that is for you to get an understanding of what goes on behind the scenes, but also we're now looking out to the membership for support with the committee. And we have in May the AGM and the branch elections coming up. So March would be the time for you to start thinking if you're interested in putting yourself forward to support the activities of the committee or standing for any of the positions that are coming up for election in May. Now, I should just stress that not all of the positions in the committee will be up for election in May. So I think it's around about a 50-50 split of the positions in the committee. Half of those will be up for election this May, and then obviously the other half will be up for election in May 2023. So how it works is that once elected to a position on the committee, you can serve for a period of 2 years before you can then stand to be re-elected. And you can stand for a maximum of 2 consecutive terms, and then you need to stand down. So if people are interested in putting themselves forward to get involved with the committee, Please feel free to get in touch with me or with the branch or with any of the management team of IRSM in the UK. But also make sure that you're available and you attend next month's meeting, because that's where we're going to be focusing on the roles and functions of the committee. Okay, moving into April, we'll be joined by one of our branch members, Rob, who is going to talk to us about tyres on mutes. It's been a topic of conversation on the WhatsApp group over recent months, and he's got a good presentation and session to do on that. May will be the AGM in the elections. Okay, so that's the full agenda going through to May and the AGM, and we're looking at getting some workshops scheduled for June and July. So this is where I give my usual spiel. If anybody's got any presentations that they would like to give, whether they're 15 minutes or 45 minutes, whatever it be, if there's a subject that's close to your heart in terms of occupational safety and health or risk management, and you feel that it would be beneficial to present that to the branch, let us know and we'll get you on the podium. Likewise, if you know of people within your organisation or within your network who you think would be able to deliver a value topical presentation to us on a particular subject, please let us know. We can get in touch and we can find out if they're interested and keen. Okay, moving on to the main topic and the main content for today, which is safety in the heat. Okay, so why is safety in the heat important? Well, obviously in the United Arab Emirates, we live in a very arid desert climate. Just excuse me one moment. Yes, sorry, as I was saying, yeah, in the UAE, our climate is one of arid, dry, hot, and towards the end of the summer months, we also have pretty unbearable humidity. The months that we're really focusing on here are April through to September. However, in my 15 years here, I've known some pretty uncomfortable Marches, and very often October and sometimes even November can be quite hot and uncomfortable in terms of both the temperature as well as sort of residual humidity. The peak temperatures tend to be in July and August, and the average maximum daily temperature in those months tends to be around about 45 degrees centigrade. Now, it's not unusual to have the thermometer creeping up towards 50 degrees centigrade at the peak of the sun during those months. So we're really dealing with, even from a global perspective, pretty extreme conditions in terms of the heat, and it's not like this heat dissipates during the night. It will stay consistently warm throughout the summer, day and night as well. I mean, obviously the nights won't be as hot as the days, but the heat does tend to retain. So there's no real escape from the heat, as you probably appreciate, during the summer months here in the UAE. So why am I talking about safety in the heat in February? It's probably the coolest month of the year. It certainly feels like it's been the coolest week of the year, with the shamal that's been blowing through over the last couple of days, bringing the temperatures down and making it quite chilly in the evenings. Well, as OSH practitioners and as risk managers, one of our functions is to identify hazards and risks and ensure that they're appropriately controlled and mitigated. And when we talk about identifying hazards and risks, we're talking about what's reasonably foreseeable. Now, one of the things that I think we can all guarantee is that come the summer here, it's going to be hot. It's going to be really very hot. It's going to be dangerously hot. Now, risk management is also an ongoing and iterative process. So we shouldn't be looking at planning or managing working in the heat on the 15th of June, we should be looking at it today. We should be looking at it all through the year as we continue to try to improve and develop our risk management processes. So let's have a look at the legal requirements first of all. Now you'll all be familiar, or you should all be familiar, with the Summer Working Hours Law. Now this used to be the Ministry of Labour until they changed to the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratisation. And there's also in Abu Dhabi Emirate, the Public Health Centre have the Code of Practice number 11 for safety in the heat. Now I'm going to look in detail at both of those. So the Summer Working Hours, the Summer Working Hour Law, excuse me, that covers basically, it's what people might know as being the summer working ban or the summer working hours ban. Okay, so it prohibits work between the 15th of June and the 15th of September between the hours of 12:30 and 3 o'clock. So for those 2.5 hours in the middle of the day, all work outdoor is banned. Okay, with the exception of essential works that can't be delayed or postponed, but they can only continue providing that there is a permit provided by the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratisation. But rule of thumb, it's pretty much a blanket ban on outdoor work between 12:30 and 3 o'clock every day between the 15th of June and the 15th of September. The law goes into further details. It does stipulate that the schedules must be, the scheduled working hours for the day must only be 8 hours. Anything over 8 hours is then subject to overtime. And the amended schedule should be displayed for all to see in languages that they can understand, including Arabic and English. In addition to that, employers must provide a cool rest area and water for all of their workers who are working outside in those hours outside 12:30 and 3 o'clock. Okay, now that's a pretty important stipulation there, a cool rest area. In my time working at the Industrial Development Bureau before at Zone School, every year you can guarantee we'll get asked questions such as, if I provide a shade in the work area, can my employees still work outside? Well, no, because if you're providing a shade, all you're doing is providing minimal protection from the direct sunlight. You're not providing protection from the heat. Okay, that would still be considered to be outdoors work, and that should be obviously prohibited. That would be prohibited. Likewise, for example, somebody might say, oh, well, I've got a forklift vehicle which has got a roof, but it's not got any windows. Okay, so it's just got a metal cover or a metal shade, if you like, as a protector against falling objects. Again, that's not working indoors. That's not working in a cool air-conditioned environment. Okay, that's working outdoors. So all those types of activities would be prohibited. Okay, the critical aspects to bear in mind as well is, like, if you're saying, right, okay, these guys aren't working, I provided them a shade they can rest underneath, that's not going to be acceptable unless it's cool. So it's got to be air conditioned. It's got to be an area where the workers and the employees can get out of the heat, they can recuperate, they can replace waters, they can rest, so they're not going to be suffering the impacts of working in the heat when they get back to work after 3 o'clock. There is a hotline number which any member of the public can call to report violations or suspected violations, which I believe is 860. Well, that's going on last year's news reports. It may change this year. But the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratisation are all very keen to ensure that this law is enforced effectively. And they will provide, if they catch companies in non-compliance, they will issue fines ranging from 5,000 dirhams per worker up to a maximum of 50,000 dirhams for each company who found in violation. Okay, so the Code of Practice on Safety in the Heat goes much further than the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratisation summer working hours law. Okay, it does reference the summer working hours law, and it does obviously stipulate that there is a requirement to comply with that regulation. But the Code of Practice on safety in the heat covers both hot weather and hot environments. Okay, so obviously it applies to people working in the warm climate of the UAE, specifically outdoors, but also if they're working in a hot environment indoors, such as near furnaces or in hot industrial areas, or even in areas which are not effectively or even at all air conditioned, but are considered to be perhaps indoors, but would still be hot during the summer. So the Code of Practice requires that appropriate training is provided to all employees within 10 days of employment and prior to the summer. Okay, so again, this is why we're looking at it now, because we are prior to the summer. So if you're going to start providing training when it starts to get warm, maybe at the end of March, start of April, maybe even start of May, then you're going to need to start thinking about what training you're going to deliver, how you're going to plan it, how you're going to deliver it. And that sort of thought process should be starting now, maybe even it should be starting at the start of the year when you're looking at your training needs analysis and your training plans. The training needs to identify the hazards of the heat, of working in the heat, what the risks are, and what the controls and responses are. And these all need to be communicated to all of the employees who are going to be working in these environments. There also needs to be training provided to first aiders and to managers and supervisors. Okay, so all of these three different critical elements of the workforce, the employees who are going to be exposed, the managers who are going to be managing them, along with their supervisors, and the first aiders who are going to be responding, they all need to have their specific training on working in the heat and working safely in the heat. The next thing you need to do is your risk management, or perhaps the first thing you need to do is your risk management. Training is the first section addressed in the Code of Practice. The Code of Practice also identifies the risk management requirements, obviously identifying the hazards, identifying the operational activities as well that expose people to working in the heat, and then defining what those controls are and ensuring that there's a process of implementing and monitoring them. Stipulated within the Code of Practice are a number of specific actions that need to be taken. Now, these are all risk management controls, but they are stipulated as actions that need to be taken to comply with the Code of Practice. So if you've got guys in Abu Dhabi working in heat, working in hot environments, then you need to make sure that you've got these processes in place as well. First one is health surveillance. You need to make sure that there is a process or a program in place for all employees who are working in hot conditions that complies with Code of Practice 5 on medical surveillance, to ensure that the physicality of these employees is being appropriately monitored to see if there is any impact on them long term in terms of their health from exposure and working in hot environments. You need to ensure that there is appropriate consideration given to engineering controls, and for any organisation that has people working at any site that is above 35 degrees centigrade, there must be a heat stress program developed and implemented. Okay. In addition to that, there is a requirement for you to ensure that there's appropriate awareness provided to employees. We've perhaps all seen the urine charts in the lavatories in workplaces, which are identifying what dehydrated urine, or what urine that is indicative of dehydration, if you like, looks like, the dark coloured urine, and the lighter coloured urine, which is indicative of being well hydrated. That is there so it can educate and make employees aware of when they might be at risk of suffering from dehydration, because once they're at risk of suffering from dehydration, they're at risk of suffering from some of the more significant heat stress symptoms and impacts. Obviously, water, fluids, electrolytes, and various different processes of hydration need to be provided to employees. there needs to be sufficient breaks provided to employees as well, so that they can have that time to cool down, to recuperate before continuing with work. I think as well, when we're talking about risk management, we're talking about the physicality of working in the heat. There needs to be more of a joined up approach and more of a holistic approach to how we manage the risks. And we'll look at that a bit more in terms of the heat stress program. Okay, so as I said, the section in Code of Practice 11, which looks at the specific requirements of the heat stress program, specifies that this is required for any organisation that has employees who are working in an environment which is over 35 degrees centigrade. Okay, so that could be indoor, it could be outdoor. But once you've got people who are exposed to that heat or more excessive heat, you need to have a heat stress program. The heat stress program will include a process for assessing the risks of the activity and what the hazards are exposing to their employees, then obviously what the control measures are. There should be an acclimatisation program established as part of the heat stress program, so any new employees to the environment will be given the appropriate time to acclimatise to the conditions. Now, obviously, when we talk about acclimatisation, people never fully acclimatise to conditions and to environments such as the ones that we work in the summer here, but they do get a bit more used to it. So you need to be able to give that opportunity for new employees coming into the environment fresh to have a little bit of a time. I think it's usually about 10 days, maybe 3 weeks, so that their bodies can adjust to the new environment that they're working in. There needs to be a program of communication established so that the current conditions in terms of the weather conditions and the climate conditions can be communicated to employees so that they're kept up to date with what the situation is and what the requirements are for them. Again, we need to be providing the day-to-day immediate controls in terms of water and fluids, necessary personal protective equipment, any shade that can be provided to the workplace, and of course any shelter that can be provided either to the workplace or as an area for rest. Work scheduling, very critical. Okay, so again, when we're talking about risk management, I think we all know what the hazards and risks are of working in hot environments, but when we're starting to look at some of the controls, if you're doing this in the middle of June, you're too late because you've already completed your training program for the first 2 quarters. You've already completed your work scheduling. Okay, we're starting to plan our works now for the summer, which we should be. Okay, then we need to be starting to think that, well, we can't schedule work between 12:30 and 3 because we know that there's a law coming that will ban that. But also, how are we going to manage other works between or outside those hours? How are we going to manage work so that we're not scheduling a large volume of very intense work around the midday hours? Okay, so planning and scheduling your work. Medical surveillance we've talked about, but that is a critical function of the heat stress program as well. And then finally, the program needs to be subject to routine monitoring. So that includes an audit, a process of inspection, investigations of any non-compliances or any hazards, any near misses, any incidents, and obviously feedback into the program any corrective actions that are required. And of course, reporting through to internal and external senior levels. Okay, so what are the sort of controls that we're thinking about when we talk about working in the heat? Okay, so from an engineering point of view, it could be looking at building insulation, talking about providing shades to protect from the direct sunlight, or shelters to actually provide a cooler working environment in which people can work. Or we might be talking about shaded areas or sheltered areas where people can take rest. Now, again, it needs to be emphasised that if people are taking rest, that they need to be able to have access to a cooled environment as well. So you might provide a shelter immediately on site for somebody to duck out to, and there should be a cool area somewhere else where they can go and they can take a proper break, get out of the heat, cool down. Which is the next point there, air conditioning. There is a recommendation in the code of practice regarding exhaust ventilations and forced air ventilations. This is not mandatory, but it is certainly a consideration that might be applied in more hot industrial environments rather than obviously external environments. Work scheduling, again, adds administrative control. And the code of practice also prohibits lone working during well, I was going to say the summer hours. It's not during the summer hours. So lone working is not permitted in these hot environments. Okay, so if you've got people who are working in a hot environment, they can't be doing it alone. Why? Well, because the risk is if they start suffering from some of the heat stress symptoms, it could get really bad really quickly for them. And if they're incapacitated by those symptoms, they're not going to be able to report in for first aid or for emergency response. Okay, so absolutely critical that you don't permit lone working in these environments. Provision of PPE, provision of fluids, whether that be water or electrolytes, but also consideration of not providing tea or coffee, not providing tea or coffee, but being aware that things like tea, coffee, a lot of sodas, if you like, so your Cokes, Pepsis, Sprites and 7-Ups, they're all quite heavily caffeinated and heavily sugared, so they're not very good at rehydrating. They might give the impression of rehydrating because they might address the thirst response, but actually once they go through the metabolism, they will actually leave the body with less water than when started, because of how the body metabolizes the sugars and the caffeines within those drinks. So it's very important that the right fluids are provided. So obviously water, there's a lot of very good electrolyte drinks, but we need to be careful of not providing energy drinks such as Red Bull and some of the other ones that are on the market as well, because again, they don't provide hydration. They actually serve the opposite, well, not the opposite purpose, but they do the opposite. And then finally, having in place a process for first aid and an emergency response procedure for dealing with some of the more serious symptoms. Okay, so we've talked, maybe we've come at this from a different angle, but because we've been through the code of practice, we've looked at what some of the control measures are in terms of training, planning, the risk assessment, and what the controls are. But we haven't really looked at and started to understand what the hazards and risks are of safety in the heat. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times heat stress. There are various different manifestations of heat stress. But what we're talking about is when the body is overheating because it's exposed to heat and it can't cool itself down anymore. So maybe it's through dehydration, or it's through excessive sweating, or it's through excessive exposure to heat. Body is starting to break down in its control mechanisms to cool itself down, and this can manifest itself in a number of different ways. And we'll go through these one by one now. But the risks of all of these is either mild discomfort in terms of heat rash, escalating through to quite significant injury, illness, and death. Okay, so with heat rash, the symptoms that you might notice would be an irritation to the skin, usually signified by clusters of pimples or small blisters. For cramps, these occur when the salts have been sweated out as the body has become hotter, and so the salts have been taken out of the muscles, and so the muscles start to cramp. So you will experience painful cramps and muscle pains or spasms, usually in the abdomen, perhaps sometimes in the legs and arms as well. When we get towards heat syncope, so this is basically a posh or medical term for dizziness or fainting. So again, through dehydration and overheating, people can develop heat syncope, which will manifest itself either in dizziness or fainting. And then we get up to the top end of the scale with heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Both of these can be quite significant and can be fatal. And you'll notice with both of these, the symptoms are, they might appear to be contradictory, if you like, or they might appear to be conflicting. So, but with heat exhaustion, you might experience heavy sweating, weakness or fatigue, dizziness, confusion and nausea, a clammy or moist skin, a pale or a flushed complexion. Okay, so somebody might appear pale, or they might appear to be excessively red in the face. So as I say, you know, quite opposite symptoms there. Muscle cramps. So it could be that somebody is suffering from heat exhaustion and it's actually confused for being something a bit milder, such as heat cramps. A slightly elevated body temperature. Again, a heat exhaustion symptom, which doesn't necessarily indicate heat exhaustion. Somebody's got a body temperature which is perhaps showing that their body's slightly elevated in terms of heat, so it might not be picked up as heat exhaustion. And then fast and shallow breathing. So there's some very specific symptoms there, but it's a suite of symptoms that people need to be aware of, either in themselves or in their colleagues, so that there can be intervention. And then finally, heat stroke, a hot, dry skin or profuse sweating. So again, two very different symptoms there. Hallucinations, chills. Now, again, something that could be misinterpreted. Would be a bit strange if somebody had been working in the summer heat in Abu Dhabi and they start to feel chilly. But it's something to be aware of, that if you do start to feel cold, then you really get into the wrong end of the scale there. Throbbing headache and a high body temperature, confusion, dizziness and slurred speech. Okay, these are all symptoms of heat stroke. And of course, heat exhaustion and heat stroke can be fatal. So in terms of our immediate response, we need to make sure that there's first aid and emergency response in place to address this. But before, we need to make sure that we've provided the appropriate training, awareness and communication to our workforce, both to our employees, to the managers and supervisors, and to the first aiders and responders. Okay, because if nobody knows what the hazards and risks are, if nobody knows what the symptoms of heat stress are, and if nobody knows what the control mechanisms and the responses are, then we're going to get ourselves into a lot of trouble quite quickly. Now, when we do have a situation where somebody is suffering from the symptoms of heat stress, then there are various different steps you can take for the various different levels of seriousness, but principally they're all about the same thing. So immediately, that person should immediately stop work, get themselves to a cool, air-conditioned place. Okay, and then the next thing is to stop the dehydration. Okay, so we need to rehydrate. Now I've put take-on fluids there, so it might be that you want to drink some water. It might not necessarily be safe if you're at late stage areas of heat exhaustion or heat stroke to drink a lot of water quickly. So depending on how serious it is, depending on what the medical advice is, it might be that damping the skin with wet towels, fanning, like I say, getting into a cool area to bring that body temperature down, and to also start to rehydrate the body, because you don't want to send the body into shock by quickly cooling it down, quickly trying to rehydrate it, because you can get yourselves into a whole new sort of mess doing that. Okay, and that is why it's critical that we have trained first aiders and access to medical treatment. Okay, so if we're not sure how serious this is, then we can always revert to trained first aiders and to medical treatment either. Well, I would say in these cases it would be the emergency room. Okay, but it's no good having access to that first aid if those first aiders aren't trained in the safety and the heat medical responses. Okay, so I've just thrown in a slide here, just going back to some of the points that I was identifying when talking about the summer work hours. But these are sort of additional hazard or risk factors, perhaps what you might call contributory factors or indirect factors or even causal factors. Okay. Now I tend to shy away from having slides like this too much in my presentations, because I think that you're trying to then second guess things that could go wrong, and that's not specifically where we're at with risk management. It's more about what's reasonably foreseeable in terms of the hazards and risks of specific activities. But what I have identified here are some of the traps that people might fall into when they're looking at safety in the heat, certainly working in the UAE. So we're talking about just having a program in place between the 15th of June to the 15th of September when the safe working hours come in and the summer working hours come in. So that means on the 14th of June, there's no hazard or risk in terms of working in the heat. What about on the 16th of September when the law expires? Does that mean there's no risk in working in the heat? No, of course not. Okay, so just because a government ministry have stipulated a set period of time in the summer when there needs to be no outdoor working, that doesn't mean that outside of those dates we shouldn't be considering the hazards and risks working in the heat. Likewise, well, on the 1st of August, it's safe to work outside at 12:29, but it's not at 12:30, and it's not safe to work at 3 o'clock, but it is safe to work outside at 1 minute past 3. Again, no, obviously not. Okay, so again, what the ministry have done is they have identified the peak time where the hazard is the highest. Okay, and they've tried to mitigate the hazards and risks of working in the heat by saying between this time and these dates, it's absolutely prohibited to work outside. Outside of those times, yeah, of course you can work outside, but there's got to be appropriate controls as well. Okay, so it's not black and white. It's not safe and unsafe. Okay, if you're working outside in the summer, up to 12:30 and after 3 o'clock, it's still damn hot. It's still really risky. Okay, so those controls have got to be put in place. Shaded but not cool. I touched on this earlier on. Okay, so the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratisation summer working hours law does say in the clauses, it says you need to make sure that workers who are not working are provided with a shaded, cool area. Okay, so when we're talking about shaded, we mean not in direct sunlight, and when we're talking about cool, we mean not in direct heat. Okay, so it's going to be indoors, probably going to have to be air conditioned. Okay, but it's the employer's responsibility to provide that. And then I've just identified a couple of others down here. Conflict of symptoms. Okay, so I touched on this with heat stroke and heat exhaustion. Okay, so it can lead to misdiagnosis. It could lead to underestimation of how bad a situation was. It could be very difficult for somebody who is confused, dizzy, hallucinating, okay, to actually appreciate that they are confused, dizzy, or hallucinating. Okay, so it's very, very important that everybody is aware of what the symptoms are so they can spot them in each other. Okay, if somebody's got to a stage where they're that dehydrated and they're overheating, they're suffering from heat stress that much that they aren't actually even able to recognize the symptoms because they've lost their faculties, they've lost their critical capacity, then they're reliant on somebody else stepping in and taking that action. Okay. Again, dry skin could be something that is confused as being not a symptom of heat stress. Likewise, the chills. Okay, so these could be there could be conflict in interpreting these symptoms. So we need to be very alert to the different symptoms and how to spot them and how to intervene early when we're talking about managing the risks and impacts of heat stress. Now, last 2 points I've put in are, again, sort of specific to the region as well. When we're dealing with managing these risks, we need to perhaps be aware of employees' recreational activities as well. So again, I talked about hydration by trying to avoid teas and coffees, but find me somebody in this country that won't enjoy a cup